Welcome to my new series, Recurring Movie Pests. The series is about me talking about things that are wrong with movies, especially in the modern era. Seriously, there are a bunch of recurring moments in movies that really grind my gears because they're done so often. I'm sure you've seen most of the movies I'm going to talk about in these videos, but just in case, there's going to be spoilers. I'll put out one video each month on the first Monday. So, enjoy the first episode.
This video will contain spoilers to the following movies.
Kaylee doesn't like me. What's the point of continuing? I'll be forever alone. No! Kaylee has got to love me deep down in her heart. She just doesn't know how much of a jerk Brian is. Brian, prepare to die.
We all have moments where we mope. You know, a little moment where we feel as though the entire world is against us and there's no hope. We all have those types of moments. Even characters from many stories have experienced this sort of thing. Take Huckleberry Finn, for instance. Jim, the slave Huck was helping across the Mississippi River, gets sold to the Phelps plantation by the two phonies that accompanied them. Huck has a little moment to himself. He kneels on the raft, cries for a little bit, then he writes a letter to Miss Watson revealing Jim's location. He then reflects on everything he's been through and how valuable Jim actually was to him in terms of friendship. Then he decides to take Jim out of slavery with the famous words, "All right then, I'll go to hell." Of course, I'm talking about the Mark Twain novel. If you watch the Elijah Wood movie, you're not going to find that moment, although you'd find something similar. In this version, Jim gets captured a little earlier than in the book, but this time doesn't get sold to Phelps, but rather put in jail. When Huck visits Jim's cell, he is shocked to learn that his father's corpse was on that steamboat they were exploring earlier in the movie. Different from the novel where Pap was found dead by Jim in a floating house on the river, which he doesn't reveal until the very end of the book. Anyway, upon hearing the news, upset that Jim didn't tell him earlier, Huck leaves the jailhouse and it seemed likely that he wouldn't go back to free Jim, but he does actually, later on. That's the issue I'm going to be speaking of. Movies where before the climax the characters mope or argue and it seems as though all is lost, but then that light of hope finally shines and we get our happy ending. The deal has been done in a few classic movies such as The Wizard of Oz and The Graduate, but it started to become more common in the modern day than it ever did before. The most recently released example I've seen is in Scoob, the Hanna-Barbera crossover film that was a bit of a bad idea, but anyway. Scooby was getting his costume to fight with Blue Falcon, but the costume couldn't be completely applied due to the collar. This forces him to take it off, which breaks a promise he made to Shaggy since childhood. Just before they exit the Falcon Fury, Shaggy stays behind after an argument between him and Scooby. That really ticked me off when I first saw that, because it's another instance of this. Conflict arising between the lead characters, leaving us to believe they'd be forever separated until that moment when they all get back together for the climax. I, no joke, yelled the question, "Why do so many modern films do that?" Academy Award winners also do exercise with this method, such as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. After having witnessed his Uncle Aaron's death, Miles Morales gets abandoned by the Spider People because they think he is incapable of defending himself properly, let alone use his powers. Jeez, don't you think that there's too much unfortunate events happening to Miles? First, he watched Peter Parker die. Then, he watched his uncle die. Now, he's being left behind when the people and the pig he looked up to decide he's useless? It's kind of cruel, don't you think? The DreamWorks films were a big part of my childhood, but some of their films use that same technique. Let's look to Shrek, a film that people all over the world love. It's that scene where Fiona reveals to Donkey the curse she was forced to live under. She's only human during the day. Every night she takes the form of an ogre, and only true love's kiss would stop this trend. Unfortunately for Shrek, he doesn't know that. So when he overhears part of the conversation, he thought Fiona just doesn't care for him, especially with the words princess and ugly don't go together. Then in the morning, Shrek was happy to have Fiona off his hands because if she doesn't care for him, why the heck should he care for her? He even yells at Donkey, and everything goes to sadness, accompanied by the Rufus Wainwright cover of Hallelujah. Even Pixar is guilty of this sort of thing, more than guilty actually, since literally every single one of their feature films has this cliche dating back to Toy Story. Sid straps Buzz to a rocket with the mind to blow him up that night, only to get delayed to the next morning due to the rain. In the meantime, Woody is trapped in a container with a toolbox on top. He tries to get Buzz to help him, but Buzz doesn't see the point because he just found out he's a toy. Woody is able to revive Buzz's spirit, but the same can't be said for his own. When Buzz disappears, it seemed as though he left Woody, only to cut back and see him helping Woody out of his predicament. I like this moment because it really closes the deal on the bond between Buzz and Woody after the two hated each other's guts for a while before. It's not just animated kids films either. Even live-action films targeted towards kids do this. Detective Pikachu is one such instance. The lead character Tim discovers that his father's Pikachu has freed Mewtwo from the lab experiment, but the exact context is not revealed yet. Then Pikachu, of course still having amnesia, leaves Tim alone in fear of betraying him again. I was only slightly bothered by this when I first saw this in the theater, but looking back at it, why would Mewtwo just insert that one part of the backstory and not the context until the end of the movie? Oh, never mind. As mentioned before with a moment in Toy Story, use of this cliche can be a good thing if it's done well, as predictable as it may be. In Wreck-It Ralph, we see a strong and well-matured bond between Ralph and Vanellope. Then comes a moment when King Candy shows up to tell Ralph why Vanellope cannot race. Ralph tries to tell it to Vanellope, but she wouldn't listen like the brat she is, and Ralph destroys her cart. This is why the two signing their work after it was complete in the car bakery was so important. The cart represents their friendship, which was broken because one of them got deceived. That's why that scene where the car is destroyed is so sad. You feel like you were tricked, just as Ralph was, though you didn't know the truth to see until the scene that follows. When the car was eventually fixed up, that means their friendship is back online. I never realized how deep this actually was until years later. In Return of the King, Gollum throws the hobbit's food off the cliff and points the finger to Sam. At this point, Frodo still doesn't know the oncoming dangers of continuing to trust Gollum, so he says to Sam, "You know what, just go home, I don't need you." That's his best friend he's talking to. The sad part is, you don't expect it to go down like this. While this film won all 11 Academy Awards that it was nominated for, including Best Picture, it certainly isn't perfect, and that moment was a small reason. It's not that it was bad, I kinda wish they didn't have to pull something like this, but it was pretty effective. It was painful to hear Sam's cries. Then there's the times where that type of conflict is unnecessary. And trust me, there's a lot of examples in the modern day. The latest Star Wars film, Rise of Skywalker, is one such example. After a fight with Kylo Ren, Rey leaves him in the Endor system and strands herself on the same planet Luke stranded himself on to hide from the First Order. Just as she was giving up the Jedi path, she is encouraged by Luke in the form of a Force spirit to go and destroy the Emperor a second time. I can't believe I had to say that. Destroy the Emperor a second time. I still don't understand why they didn't properly explain how he came back in this movie, but at this point I don't care anymore, especially since this is the last chapter in the Skywalker saga. Ugly Dolls. My gosh! This movie is one I never thought I'd talk about on this channel in 1,000 years. You know, I reviewed Felix the Cat the movie at one point, so why should I complain too much? I don't know. Maybe because this movie is total garbage? Okay, back to the main topic. This reveal of the fact that ugly dolls were never meant to exist is just another tragic moment. I had to put that in quotations because we don't even care about them. Right from the beginning, we get song after song, and they're all so horrendous and forgettable. It's gonna date horribly decades from now. Also, the characters are very poorly developed and very unlikable. The story is cliche, the animation is obnoxious, the villain is too over the top. Also, the moping before the climax where not just Moxie feels worthless, but the entire town of Uglyville. They were leading pleasant lives at the beginning, but now they're just miserable because of a little bit of news they never heard about. If I'm wrong, don't even bother to correct me because I don't even care. I better calm down. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about movies that horrendously bad. But that's what happens, man. You talk about examples of how a certain thing is done poorly and you just had to hit the bottom of the barrel. You know, maybe it was a good thing I brought up Ugly Dolls because that was a movie deemed well-meaning but derivative. It sounds like it could have gone somewhere, but in the final cut, it was a dated cliche fest and an absolute nightmare, not just to watch, but also to think about. But I'm sure you get the idea. Moping about before the climax should be used more sparingly. Less kids' films should be doing this. It pains me to know that filmmakers in the modern era are highly unlikely to take that bit of advice. Nah, they'll do anything to make a cheap buck, even if it means not caring about whatever the heck they make. If they're getting the paycheck, they're satiated.